me about the Nishanan way of life before the gold rush, and
Sure.
then what happened?
Well, life before the gold rush was basically, could be considered basically a paradise. Our people did not need to travel very far. We did not need a great deal of land. You know, 20 to 40, 80 square miles would have taken care of a very large number of people. We changed the environment of our living area through burning and pruning of nature. We discovered long ago that we could plant the oak trees in groves, and forestry people have discovered that if they look at the old groves and some of the old forests, that they can find perfectly square oak groves from long ago. Also, most of the vegetation around here was gone. We burned it for grass fields. Grass seeds was one of our main staples, as well as acorns. So, so we nurtured nature and lived with nature, and everything came from nature. So all we needed to do was find water, and water was plentiful around here. We had Deer Creek right here. Also supporting Deer Creek was all the main springs that come off the hillsides, and that's where basically all the main villages were. They always sought out the springs on a bluff with southern exposure, and because of the warmth and stuff, and so that's where you'd find most of the habitat.
So you said this area could support large numbers of people. How many people lived here in the 1840s?
Well, we estimate, or I estimate by going back through the census and what's been recorded, is that we estimate that there is conservatively over 7,000 people that lived in our territory. And by 2 years after the gold rush, one of the first censuses that was taken, it was already dropped to 3,400 people. So half the population disappeared within the first 2 years of the gold rush. By 1867, there was only 500 natives left. By the census of 1905, there was only 84 natives that could be located, okay? And by 1934, when the Indian Reorganization Act took effect, there was only 18. So that's one of the reasons, and one of your earlier questions was, why do everyone thinks the Nishanan Nation was extinct, is basically because there was very few left. And Nevada City Rancheria was the very last in our territory, so last location. So all the villages around, as time went on, after the newcomers and gold seekers arrived, they started condensing into other villages because of the population, such a fast decrease. So the very last move was the Hyatt village out of Grass Valley moved in 1898 to the Nevada City Rancheria, and that made it the very last village in our territory.
What was the population of the Nishanan people before the gold rush, and then what happened?
Well, do you want me to do the whole thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd like you to incorporate in the answer the idea that this is an estimate and people
Right.
did, so we don't really know.
Right.
And then the follow-up question, which you can either incorporate or I'll ask it as a follow-up question, is why did the population
Decline.
collapse?
So okay. The population of our people that we estimated prior to the gold rush, and it's a very conservative figure, we estimate about 7,000 people, and that's based upon reversing some of the census that on time frames and how fast it was decreasing in numbers. But 7,000 is a number that I'm very comfortable with using, but I believe it's very conservative. Within 2 years of the gold rush, we have reports and census that says that our population was approximately 3,400 Indians. So over 50% of the people have already disappeared during that period of time. By 1867, the census of that period only recorded in the neighborhood around 500 Indians. Okay, and then by the census that was taken in 1905 through 1906 encompassed both Indians on a reservation or a rancheria, as well as the Indians not living on the reservations, and that had a number of 84. And by 1934, when they created the Indian Reorganization Act, the population was down to 18. And that is the numbers of the natives that they were able to locate. Now, I do know that some of our older people hid from government agencies, so they may have lived out into the woods and not wanted to be found or be counted. So, but the numbers that I was expressing was how fast the population decreased. Now, the decrease of our people was done in several things. One, it was just the pure slaughter of our people. The native people were basically considered as vermin, and they actually placed bounties on them in the 1850s. And that came from the call of our first governor that basically called for the extinction of the red race in California. So the bounties on our people, you could get as much as $5 for a head or a scalp of any Indian. Now that really came into swing right after the gold rush within a few years, because the easy gold was already gone. Okay, so people that came here in the thousands and thousands and thousands needed an income. So some of those people, which were quite ruthless in the first place, took up the career of Indian hunting and to make a living, and that's what they did. Also, some of the laws changed where they could created indenturement. Indenturement is just a nice word of saying slavery. So those people also went out from the valleys, and the cities that were in the valley would come up to our country and in the foothills and basically find villages with a lot of children, slaughter all the adults, the men and the women and the grandparents, in order just to capture all the children and then take them down into the valley or to mining camp, the young girls to the mining camps, and then sell them. And they could get as much as $60 for a boy, but they could get as much as $200 for a young girl. So that's another way they made livings. And our library has documentation upon documentation of this all occurring during that whole period of time. It occurred all the way up into the 1870s. So the other thing that affected our population was disease. The disease that the newcomers brought to our people. We had no immunity to them. You could go back farther, though. It was malaria that came up, and during the 1830s, that killed off most of the valley from the traders and the stuff that came up the rivers. And reports are village after village, as the boats would come up the big rivers, could just see just total death, the skeletons leaning up against trees and stuff. So, but during the gold rush period, we weren't affected too much by the malaria epidemic that occurred down below. The other thing was starvation. If you look back at the very early portraits and sketches of Grass Valley and Nevada City, you'll see that as far as the eye can see, there was not a tree existing. Okay? Well, oak trees and pine trees was our food source. They used them to build the communities, they used them in the mines and stuff, and without our main staple, it was those food sources were gone. They also brought up foreign grasses for our grass fields for their livestock. Those foreign grasses took over our native grasses, and that was gone to us. Plus, the grass fields were occupied by livestock, so we couldn't enter them anymore. The other item that disappeared was hydraulic mining started, washing and away of the hillsides. We have one newspaper report that says just a handful of men with the powerful monitors were able to take the guts right out of the mountain and make it disappear in a very short period of time. Well, all that water ended up going down the Yuba River. Was one of our main sources for salmon. So our people were, and with the muddy waters, the salmon didn't return. So starvation was another main reason why our population declined.
So what was the main disease that affected your people?
Another reason for our decline in population was disease, and that main disease was smallpox. Our people did not have immunity to it, and it would literally decimate whole villages. We have newspaper accounts of villages being reported to the local tradespeople and to the community that when a village was hit with smallpox, that it generally killed all the children first, and then started killing the younger people and the old people. And in a lot of cases, the village would then move and abandon that village because there was so small a population that they'd have to join with larger villages. And that was one reason why villages kept combining until the very last village was the Nevada City Rancheria.
So in all of the reasons that you just gave for the decline in population, the ones that are most shocking to me are the bounties and the slavery. Because what it sounds like is that those were both sanctioned by the government. Do I have that right?
You are correct. The law that was created when California first became a state was...
Hold on. You just had a major light change.
Yes, you did.
Okay, go ahead. You want to ask that again?
So were the bounties?
I got it.
Okay.
One of the reasons that for the slavery and basically the slaughter of our people came from the law that was created right at when California was first becoming a state. And the law was called the Protection of the Native Americans law, and in it had 20 items that you could deal with, and in those laws, it was okay to kill an Indian because the laws exempted the testimony of an Indian that it could not be submitted in court against a white person. So a crime could be committed against an Indian no matter what. It could be rape, it could be murder, it could be theft. And if the Indian filed charges, his testimony could not be used in court. And that ruling went all the way up to the Supreme Court and on one particular case in our territory. In that particular case, the Supreme Court ruled that all the testimony of the Indian had to be thrown out, or even a Chinaman had to be thrown out, because it could not be used as testimony for a crime committed by a white person.
Wow. And the slavery that you mentioned, was this after the Emancipation Proclamation? That slavery of black people was illegal, but it was still okay to enslave Indians?
Correct, because the Proclamation of Emancipation exempted the Redskins from being included in that. And so therefore the Native Americans could still go into indenturement. And indenturement was a new form was a new word that was created that instead of the word slavery. And even in the South with the black people, indenturement was still going on after the Civil War. But in California it was used extensively and stuff. But slavery always goes back. Sutter's Fort was built by Nishinon Indians. He would bring his militia up to the to the foothills and capture whole villages, and then take the whole village down there and cage the children and stuff in order to keep the adults there. Then the leader of the tribe, his head would be severed and hung from the gatepost, the entrance, so everyone knew, all the native people knew that of the power of the white person, because their leader's head is hung and rotting up at the main entrance of Sutter's Fort. So history is it's not told. It's just not told what happened to our people, but it's there, and we're trying to get some of this word out, and that's what our people is hoping to do. So we've been quiet for really too long.
Right. When you were a kid, were you afraid to let people know you were an Indian?
Well, I was actually born on the reservation. I am probably the very last person who was born and lived there on the reservation. My brother was born a year later.
Sorry to interrupt. We're just getting like a radical light change, and it's hard for me. I want this to be used, but it's.
No, I'm fine. Don't worry about me.
Okay, so we're rolling now.
So we'll just start that again. Tell starting with where you were born.
I was actually born on the reservation, and I'm probably the very last member of our tribe who was actually born on the reservation and actually lived there. My brother was born about 15 months after I was born, but he never came out of the hospital. He had a bad foot and he was submitted to the hospital, and he was in the hospital for his first 2 years. When he came out of the hospital, we joined. But when I was 2 years old, the government came in and removed all the children off the reservation. Okay, and that included my 2 aunts and my mother, who were still not considered adults. My mom was only 17 at that time, and my other aunt was 15, and the other one was only 13. So, and then myself, and we have government records that show that that was the children that was removed. And so we all were exploded. I grew up in Grass Valley. When my brother Bob came out of the hospital, we were joined and was placed at Nana Orzali's residence in Grass Valley, and we basically lived there until we were removed, and eventually and was sent down to my mother's by force to live with her for my last year in high school. So I never lived on I grew up with my family, or never grew up with any of our ancestors, my grandparents. We lived in foster care, and that was the government's decision. And they used to do that, take children and send them to schoolings, boarding schools and native schools and stuff. But the very last action done for the government against the Indians was basically when they removed us and sent us into foster care, and that was in 1951.
So as recently as the 1950s, the government was removing Indian children from their families. Why?
Well, one of the reasons we really don't know the real reason, but we do know some of the reasons why they were taking some actions like that. In 1947, the plan was starting to get developed to terminate all the California rancherias. And so in 1947, they started the plan. One of the things they wanted to do, though, which we know about, was to start depopulating the reservations or rancherias. So we believe that one of the reasons to do that was start removing the children. And We don't know how many other reservations they did that within California, but we do know that they did that at the Nevada City Rancheria. So by depopulating it, it basically left only 2 Indians that were actually still living there, and that was my grandparents, Pete and Margaret Johnson. So.
What do your grandparents, what do you remember them telling you about that time?
We used to come back, and one thing that Nana Orzali was very good on was that she did understand family. She was able to get me and my brother reconnected with our grandfather. She would allow us to come back a couple times a summer and spend a week or 2 weeks up there and stay with our grandparents every summer until it was started to get close to termination. So, but in talking with my grandparents, we never talked really about the history of our people and stuff. I do remember going with my grandfather. We'd walk downtown and he would buy me a little itty bitty cup of ice cream. Now, he was extremely poor, okay? In 1964, when they terminated the Rancheria and they burned down his house had it was really not much more than a cabin, just a square box, real small. Everything was there. The bed was there, the table was there, the chair was there, and the stove was there. And that's all you had, all in one room. But when they burned it down, it still had no electricity, no running water, no sewage disposal systems at all. It was really very rough for them. No refrigeration. So they had, if they needed fresh products, they had to walk downtown, which is about 2 miles, and to get fresh supplies. On one of those trips, I went with him. We then detoured up to the old city dump, which is where our tribal leader lived. And that was Chief Kelly and Chief Lewis Kelly. And they would talk. And I remember hearing some stories of them talking and stuff. And so that's basically all I know about my background. So,
Is there a reason why your grandfather didn't talk about your tribal history?
well, most likely is because we were very young. And we were interested in playing with the horses and swimming in the water and the springs and stuff and running around the countryside. So, but he was never really a talkative man. I never remember seeing him talking a lot. He was very quiet. My grandmother was extremely quiet. So they're even with us, there wasn't that much interaction with Grandma. She was always really quiet and stuff. So
how do you, this is a more personal question, how do you personally go about reconnecting with your heritage?
Reconnecting with my heritage occurred for me very late in life. When I was in first grade, I put a story in our book about what happened. And basically, I let it known that I was an Indian. The teacher and most of the students wanted me to get up in front of the class and dance, do my Indian dance, rain dance, war dance, whatever. At that time, I knew nothing about my history, my heritage, my culture. All I knew about the Indian world was what I seen on TV. So I went up in front and I imitated those. Everyone had a good laugh, but it truly embarrassed me a great deal. So much that after that, I didn't tell anyone that I was a Native American anymore until I became an adult. And then I had no problem with telling them who I was and stuff like that. When the our last leader, Rose, died. He wasn't an official chief. He took over after Lewis Kelly died in 1980. And Mr. Rose took over after that, and he was leader until 1997 when he passed away. It was that time the tribal members decided that we needed to examine how we were going to lead ourselves from there. Ginger Covert called me in for a meeting, and we talked about it, and that's when they decided to start a council. I was involved with raising a family, my career, and I told them if they ever needed me, just give me a call, I'll be right there. In 2007, they called me, and I came in and then started to help them. And it was the following year, I was then elected as tribal chairman, became the leader of the tribe. It was at that point in time I decided that if I was going to be the leader, I needed to know everything there was about our people, and that's when I started studying. And I got it all down. I was able to receive all the newspaper articles of the mid-1850s from a historian here in the community who does not share his library, but he gave them to me so that I could start recording our history down. And I went through all the anthropologist books and stuff and just started to record everything. And I was convinced by Wally Hagelman, which is the curator of the 49er Museum, where a lot of our historical items are stored, I better need to record what I know. But it was during all that research is when I made my connection back to our people. And I know that's late in life, but that's when I did it. And so now I know a great deal of how we existed prior, what happened in the middle of it, and I know now where we want to go to. So.
Excuse me. So, if there's one thing that people don't know about the Nishanan people that they should know, what is it?
I think the most important thing that people need to know about the Nishanan people is that we're still here. The other thing that needs to be known is we need to correct the history books. The history books have it wrong. Back in the late 1800s and stuff, they started. They wanted to identify the Indian races in California, so they started doing linguistic studies, and they wanted to identify the tribes because all the Indians were basically called Digger Indians. And many things are named. We got the Digger tree, the Digger pine tree, so things are called Digger. And Digger was just a slang name that they used to associate all Indians together because we dug for roots and we did everything, so that's what they called all the Indians. Well, they wanted to define that more finer, and they came up with linguistic groupings, and they grouped the Yamani Indians, which are now called the Mountain Maidu, and the Concow Indians and the Nishanan Indians, and they grouped them all together and said that these are Maidu. Well, that's wrong. That's wrong to call our people Maidu. It's like Maidu is a linguistic naming of a language, okay, not a name of a people. So, it's like the word Latin. Do you know of anybody called Latin or a country called Latin? No, this is the Nishanan nation, and we should be called Nishanan, not Maidu. And so that's really been one of our biggest efforts, is to get out what this territory is and who were the people that were here prior to the gold rush, and that is to tell them that we are the Nishanan nation. We're the local tribe, and there are still some that still exist.
I remember when I was in elementary school in California, seeing a documentary film about Ishi, the last Indian.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, I guess they're all gone.
Yep. He was the last one of his nation. Yeah.
But the way that was presented was, you know, the Indians aren't here anymore.
I have a story that was told to us by one of the real old timers in the community. And basically it occurred in the mid 1940s. He knew my grandparents and he knew their 3 daughters, and which was my 2 aunts and mother. And he was downtown one day when he was really young, and he was walking behind my grandfather and my grandmother, who would frequently go down to the post office, because that was the only form of communication, was mail, and pick up a few groceries. And he was behind him. The chief of police of Nevada City, the highest law enforcement officer in that community, walked up behind him and beat my grandfather over the head with a billy club, knocking him down to his knees. And the groceries went down the street and down the sidewalk. And he laughed about it, on how funny it was, when he walked away. So being an Indian was not necessarily a good thing. So you didn't go around and yelling, I'm an Indian, I'm one of the last, because you probably get beat up pretty badly. So that's the reason why we've been so quiet. Our business was our business, and our celebrations was our celebrations, not for general public, okay? But with the encroachment of other people into our territory, we have decided that we needed an outreach program. And we started discovering that things were being named and labels were being identified and language was starting to be taught. That wasn't ours, it was somebody else's. So when we discovered that Deer Creek was going to be dedicated to somebody else and not the local Indians, we decided that we needed to put an outreach program, start communicating with people, and start getting history correct. So that's what we did. And we reached out to Deer Creek, and they accepted us. It took a little bit of time, but they did accept and understand that we were the true natives. This territory was truly ours, and we had many sacred sites here, and Deer Creek as being one of them, that they have invited us in to participate with them and try and get history recorded correctly.
So has our society evolved to the point where it is now safe for you to claim and proclaim who you are?
Oh yes, there's been many things that's changed in laws and stuff to allow that to happen, and this community has been really has treated the Native American people very well. Even during the gold rush times, there was people trying to protect the Indians. The Craig family, where our land was, where the Rancheria, which was called Camp Pooty, actually was owned by the Craig family, and they gave it to us to live there for eternity and hopefully never to be disturbed or moved again. The men and the women of the Golden West, they provided housing for us. They built the first cabins there. However, the first cabin was burnt down by the natives, and they put up one of their yeah, it was burned down by us because they put a standard housing over it. They didn't want to live in a woodshed, so But it took a little bit of time, and pretty soon we got a newspaper report that said there are now 3 structures on the reservation, and one of them even has windows and stuff. So we basically converted over to living like the white people, and so things changed. But if it wasn't for some of these people protecting us, it's very possible that none of us would be here. So even though there was tragedies and atrocities, there was still some good people here that really felt that if we were left alone, we would be peaceful, we'd be happy, and we would be contented. And we tried.